Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our very first session. It is so nice having you here for our 60th conference. My name is Marie Yo. I'm a senior language specialist here at RELC, and I'm so happy to see you all. I'm chairing the invited speaker session number 1 by Associate Professor Victor Lim. Let me tell you a little bit about Victor Lim. Professor Lim is an associate professor and deputy head of research, English language and literature at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He researches and teaches on multiliteracies, multimodal discourse analyses, and digital learning. He has received awards for his excellence in research, teaching, and service. This morning, Professor Lim will speak on the topic of designing for literacy learning in the digital age. The presentation will be for about 40 to 45 minutes, and the remaining time will be for question and answer. So please take note of your questions, and we hope to have lots of interesting questions. Now, I'd like to invite Associate Professor Victor Lim to take the stage and to give us your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I know it's really tough to draw you in after the sumptuous reception that you have out there, but thank you for coming, and I hope that this session will be useful for you. Make this session yours. If you have any questions at the end of the session, please, you can fill them during the discussion, or you can write to me. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for this wonderful invitation. It's a tremendous privilege for me to be here to speak at the 60th anniversary of the RELC conference. I attended my first RELC conference in 2011, and the theme then was on multiliteracies. And after attending the conference, after spoken to the people and listened to the various sessions, it really launched my research trajectory into understanding a little bit more about how we can support our teachers and students in the teaching and learning of multiliteracies in the classroom. So I have done several projects related to multiliteracies, and I will share with you some of it today as well. Now for today, I'm going to focus on the big question of designing for literacy learning in the digital age. How do we do that? I will share with you two big concepts. The first is on designing learning, and the second is on learning as design. And hopefully at the end of it all, it will inspire you to think a little bit more about your role as a language and literacy teacher in the digital age. First, let's think about literacy learning in the digital age. Well, I don't have to really belabor the point here. The stage has been set by Ms. Susan Leong, as well as our as the Education Minister from Brunei this morning, talking about the role of generative AI in today's contemporary communication landscape. The fact of the matter, of course, we know is that our students are using generative AI, and this is a report that was found that was based in the UK. And well, in the Singapore context, some of you may have watched the Channel News Asia documentary, and you know that, well, teenage students are really using generative AI to do their homework. How frequently are they using generative AI? Well, some are using it several times a day, but many of them at least once a week. So this is the kind of environment that we are teaching in today. And the questions that we have as education researchers, as teachers in the classroom, will be then, how do we respond to the use of digital tools, to the new literacy demands that these tools bring to our students? Now I'm going to talk about the concept of designing learning. For the longest of time, when we think about teaching and learning, we think about the teacher as the role, as the sage on the stage, in the role of the knowledge authority, the know-it-all. But we know that the internet has changed all that, isn't it? I mean, the content that they get from the internet and today from generative AI would challenge the notion that the teacher indeed is the sage on the stage. And about 20 years ago, I would say that a popular understanding of teaching has replaced this particular role of teacher-centered learning and challenged the value of didactic teaching. And that is thinking about the teacher as a facilitator of learning. So rather than on the stage, the teacher is seen as the guide by the side. Now really, is the teacher just a guide by the side that facilitates students' learning? We recognize that, in fact, the teacher does more than that. The teacher has to model, the teacher has to scaffold, the teacher has to consolidate the learning for the students as well. And indeed, there are times in the classroom or during the lesson where the teacher needs to step forth and lead in some of the didactic teaching at specific stages of the lesson as well. And one of the view of thinking about teaching and learning that I feel is very powerful is to recognize that the teacher is not just the sage on the stage or the guide by the side, but really a designer of learning experience. Now, the thesis we had in teaching and learning has been that the teacher should be the center of the classroom. The antithesis that has come is that we need to focus on student-centered learning. And I guess the synthesis that is now emerging is the recognition that the teacher is a designer of learning experience, choosing at specific lesson stages to step forward and lead and model and consolidate, and at specific lesson stages to step back so that the students are able to lead in the learning through inquiry-based experiences as well. So what does it really mean to be a designer of learning experience? Well, the teacher as the designer of learning experience will reflect on the use of material resources and the structures of power in a specific environment to best express their meaning. The notion of pedagogy as design is not something that is new. It was very much informed by the work of the New London Group way back in 1996, thinking about the notion of pedagogy as design. Everyone engaged in learning, both teachers and students, are designers of meaning, as both are engaged in shaping the social interaction between them through communication. So what does it mean to be designing learning? I'm going to share with you this particular understanding that I have with regard to how learning can be designed. In designing learning experiences, teachers enact multimodal pedagogies, embodied teaching, as well as the use of semiotic technologies with attention to the students' learning processes to cultivate multimodal literacies and to build their semiotic capital. And I'm going to unpack this statement for you in this first part of the presentation. First, multimodal literacy. So recognizing really, as we now see, that literacy is more than just knowledge and skills, but a social practice. Literacy involves and includes competence, which is the acquisition of knowledge and skills, plus a certain semiotic awareness that is developed in the students. But more than that, literacy also involves the cultivation of identity, the attitudes, beliefs, and values of the students. Multimodal literacy, therefore, involves that codified knowledge and skills related to how meanings are made across different semiotic modes, the semiotic awareness that is cultivated in the students, as well as thinking about their attitudes, beliefs, and values as they use multimodal representations to express their ideas, their experiences, and their identity. So in the work that I have done in Singapore related to the Multiliteracies project, we look at how we can identify several learning processes related to the building up of students' multiliteracies in the classroom. So I'm not going to belabor the point about these learning processes. If you're interested, of course, I will share with you some of the work that I've done so that you can read out a little bit more about that. But the idea really is how we can support teachers in the classroom to begin to design for multiliteracies learning across by applying some of the design principles that we have. So the culmination, of course, of the work that we have done is published in this book, Designing Learning for Multimodal Literacy. I'm glad to see colleagues from ALICE, whom I work with, Charles, and some of the other colleagues from MOE CPDD, they have contributed very much towards the ideas in this book. So it is theoretically informed, but more importantly, it has been pedagogically and practically grounded in the classroom experiences of the teachers, where we design then lesson packages to think about how multiliteracies can be best enacted in the classroom. Multimodal pedagogy, very quickly, I will just share with you that there are a few notions related to that. The first is the notion of embodied teaching. Now, that is something that I'm quite excited about. Essentially, it's about recognizing that the kind of learning experiences that you design in the classroom is more than through words alone. So more than just what the teacher says, what the student says. In the past, when we think about classroom interaction, we have focused very much on IRE, initiation, respond, evaluation, or initiation, respond, and feedback. But with, well, video technology, when you record the classroom experience, so you know that you are capturing more information, more data than just the words of what the teacher and student says. But the learning experience is really multimodal. It's expressed through the teacher's use of gestures, space, and position in a classroom, as well as even facial expressions. So, multimodal pedagogies involve raising awareness of the teacher's embodied teaching, as well as recognizing how semiotic technologies can be meaningfully used in the classroom. So the notion of semiotic technologies draws from the work of Emilia Jonow and Theo van Leeuwen, thinking about how the kind of technologies that we use are ultimately social practices that we enact in the classroom. And in my own work, I have used the lens of semiotic technologies to help us think about how knowledge is represented, how the pedagogic relationship is expressed, as well as how the learning is organized when specific tools, for instance, Kahoot, PowerPoint, or even discussion forum is used in the classroom. So thinking about how the nature of knowledge is changed when you use specific tools in the classroom, thinking about how the kind of relationship you have with the students is transformed when you use specific tools in the classroom, as well as how learning can be organized with these tools. So what does it mean to be a designer of learning? In my first book, I unpacked this notion of embodied teaching, and I argue that as a designer of learning, the teacher judges the best way in which the learner can express their learning outcomes, and of course is mindful of both the learning profiles of the students, as well as the kind of tools that he brings into the classroom, the resources that he brings to the classroom, with an understanding of both the affordances and constraints of these tools. Semiotic capital, that was another term that I had in my definition. And that is about drawing on the understanding that learning is centrally related to the student's augmentation and transformation of semiotic resources. What does it mean? As a student learned, we are providing them with the opportunity to augment and transform their semiotic resources in terms of meaning making. So for instance, being able to grow their vocabulary in the English language to express ideas using different words. So sometimes you complain that your students are using nice all the time. So you enlarge their vocabulary, you transform their vocabulary. Similarly, in the work that we have done, we have introduced a meta language for images, as well as other multimodal text, so that we provide the kind of resources to enable our students to be able to describe and discuss meaning mix multimodally as well. Beyond that is also recognizing that there are privileged forms of knowledge representation. So for instance, disciplinary literacy. How a science essay is expressed and represented is very different from how a history essay should be represented and expressed, because there are privileged forms of knowledge representation that we want our students to master. And of course, very excitingly, is also emerging forms of literacy practices. How did various social media influencers become so popular? What are some of the ways in which they have communicated their ideas and their experiences that help them draw a following? And of course, with the use of AI, literacy practices like the use of prompts become something that we need to pay attention to as well. So in designing learning, ultimately, as I mentioned, is the notion of how we are able as teachers to enact multimodal pedagogies, being very conscious and aware of the kind of semiotic resources we use to orchestrate the learning experiences, being very intentional about the kind of tools and resources we bring into the classroom as part of designing the learning experiences, with the goal of focusing on students' learning processes so as to cultivate their multimodal literacy. And that perspective really is to help us then think about how we can build our students' semiotic capital to be able to make meaning across different literacy contexts. Are you guys okay? And this is the focus of the work that I've been doing for the last 5 years, thinking about how we can understand a little bit more how teachers design meaningful learning experiences using digital tools and of course across different contexts as well, with a specific focus on in Asia. And I'm very proud of this book because this is a book that I collaborated with Jet Pan from Hong Kong. And what we wanted to do was really to spotlight the good work that our colleagues in Asia have been doing in relation to how they are designing various learning experiences with multimodality. So, so if you're interested, of course, you can of course explore these books to have a better understanding of how, in context similar to us, how teachers are actually rising up to the core to design learning experiences. And now I move to the third part of the talk, focusing on the big idea of learning as design. So we have talked about designing learning. I'm going to introduce to you another notion and hopefully help you reflect and think about your role as a literacy educator in today's digital age. There are two learners, Ah Beng, with a lackadaisical attitude, but score A in exams. Ah Seng, great attitude, but scores B in the exams. So who is the better learner? How many of you think Ah Beng is the better learner? How many of you think Ah Seng is the better learner? Right? So these are questions that I would like you to think about as I talk about the notion of learning as design. The work of learning as design is based on the work by Günter Kress in social semiotics, as well as Stefan Selander looking at designs as learning. So Kress argues that every sign made is new and creative. Learning, therefore, is actively designing meaning, and it demands an acknowledgement to the range of semiotic modes that we use beyond speech and writing and ways in which meanings are made in the contemporary communication landscape. So learning as design premises on student exercising agency and, of course, the centrality of choice in meaning making. Now, choice, of course, is based on the availability of students' resources for meaning making and is motivated ultimately by their interests. So, of course, if you're interested in the work of multimodality, a foundational text that should be explored will be Günter Kress' book in 2010 on multimodality. So we have looked at the notion of students learning as design based on the work of Kress and Selander in our paper on, in the London Review of Education. And we argue that learning as design shifts attention from a narrow focus of students' competence demonstrated in the product they make to a broader valuing of the learning process in meaning making. And this is timely and important in the age of generative AI, when students with just a few phrases in the prompt can generate the essay product that used to contain their science of learning. Now, historically, if you think about the English language teacher, how do we know that our students have learned? We look at the essay they write, right? The writing that they compose, the product that they have. But now with generative AI, some of these products can be easily generated. And therefore, we need to then think about the learning process a little bit more. We are therefore interested in students' science of learning during the learning process. So learning is not just viewed as an accumulation of knowledge. It's ongoing, it's agentic, and it's a situated process of meaning-making, drawing on a repertoire of semiotic resources of students as they engage and negotiate with ideas and knowledge in their representation of their ideas, experiences, and identities. Central to the notion of learning as design are two valuing. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is the valuing of learners' agency, recognizing how they're shaping their own learning through their semiotic choices. So Günter Kress and Stefan Selander did quite a fair bit of their work looking at learning in an informal context, for instance, in a museum. So when students go into the museum exhibition, how do we recognize whether they have learned through the experience? How did they transform their own knowledge through the experience of going through an exhibition? Learning is very much motivated by the students' interests, identities, and purposes. We know that we have taught, but how do we know that the students have learned? Learning must be personalized, authentic, and empowering so as to support students to become effective in their multimodal meaning making. The second valuing is about valuing literacy practices from students' everyday lives. Now, this is something that is new, but perhaps not so new to all of us as well. Recognizing that our students life world literacies are very much shaped by social media, video games, and popular culture, right? And thinking about how we can bridge the students' life world with the world of the classroom. Learning as design is also recognizing that learning is not something that goes on in your head. The language and literacy classroom for the longest of time has focused very much on the cognitive dimension. So many of you are familiar with the Bloom's taxonomy. Yes, and of course we know the different levels of cognition or thinking. But do you know that Bloom actually wanted to develop two other taxonomy as well? One for social-emotional learning and one for psychomotor skills. He didn't manage to do it in his own career, but his student and his colleague eventually did that. But obviously, we have been more, attracted by the cognitive dimension rather than the social, emotional, and the physical. But what we want to bring across through the paradigm of learning as design is to recognize that literacy is not just a set of neutral technical skills. They are social practices. They are related to the formation and negotiation of attitudes, beliefs, and values that I've talked about. And therefore, it's not just about what goes on in the head, but it's fundamentally effective and embodied. So what we hope to do through the work that we have been developing is to rebalance the cognitive focus in teaching and learning with attention to the effective and embodied domains. Think about it, Gen AI, being able to perform low-level cognitive tasks, but is it able to perform effective tasks or embodied tasks as yet? Perhaps not. And perhaps we have to think about then the language and literacy classroom. How can we develop our students holistically beyond just the sole focus on cognition? And one of the ways that we thought we can do that is really through exploring opportunities for students' multimodal meaning making through the work of digital multimodal composing. I'm glad that Christoph is here as well because this is really his domain. Theo van Leeuwen, way back in 2008, described multimodal composing as new writing, right? And digital multimodal composing has been recognized to be able to express students' ideas and identities in creative ways, affirming their cultural identities, increasing their student motivation and confidence. And it's a field that is growing quite rapidly in the last few years with a lot of interest, perhaps also in light of the challenges that generative AI pose to the way we think about language and literacy instruction, and how multimodal composing can offer a way for us to have a deeper insight into the student learning processes. I'm very glad to have a paper accepted in RELC Journal, where we look at how school teachers in Singapore in the primary school context have tried to enact some of opportunities for multimodal composing, and we talk about how there may be more opportunities in getting students to engage in role play, making storyboards and comic strips can come to can be realized in the classroom as well. So thinking about the way in which digital multimodal composing is valued in the curriculum. In our own work with my colleague, Toh Wei Ming, we wanted to then make a case to say that, well, let's not think about DMC or students' digital play as something that is frivolous, as something that is not really relevant to the classroom. But let's show how, through the students making of YouTube videos, as a way to express their ideas and identity, there could be opportunities for learning as well. So what we did, well, we adopted a case study approach where we look at some YouTube videos that are out there of children around the world, including one from Singapore, and we applied a multimodal discourse analysis approach to analyze these videos and think about how these videos are actually revealing about students' literacies and skills. Have you seen these videos before? Like students making YouTube videos, children making YouTube videos for play? Yes? Some of you? Yep. And really, when you do the analysis, when we did the analysis, it was so fun because we were able to see signs of creativity, critical thinking, semiotic awareness. Many of these literacies that we have valued that we have valued as new literacies, or in a Singapore context as what we call emerging 21st century competencies that we want to develop in our students. Then we push the boundary a little bit more because we know that video games is a bit controversial, screen time and addiction. But what we really wanted to do was to push the conversation beyond just a focus on the quantity of screen time to really the quality of screen time. So we look at video games of teenagers, and we explored the kind of possibilities that it offered for their learning as well. So this was the user experience approach that we adopted. And what we did was that, again, not surprising, we found that through the playing of these video games, youths were demonstrating empathy, critical thinking, as well as multimodal literacy as well. In another paper, we thought, okay, because there have been a lot of research related to the value of co-play, and we wondered about the use of video games for younger learners, like in a primary school context. So we thought, okay, because I play Roblox with my kids, I say, let's look at YouTube videos where parents and a child, where a father or mother, well, in this case it's all fathers, a father and a child play Roblox with their kids. Have you heard of the game Roblox? Yes, some of you? Yeah, if not, you must try, okay? I mean, it's not a very sophisticated game. I always lose to my kids, but still it's quite fun. And we analyze the kind of interaction in their co-play. So the father and the son are playing the Roblox game together. We analyzed the interaction, and we found that through digital co-play, children are learning in several ways, through communicating, through making, through modeling for their parents, through teaching their parents, and even leading their parents. So again, what we wanted to do was to change the perception that digital play is all frivolous, but there are things that can be learned from that. Supporting kids supporting caregivers in digital play was also one agenda in the work that I have done. So thinking about how we can then do a systematic review of the kind of apps that are out there and understanding a little bit more about the kind of effects that these studies have done in reporting about the value of these apps. Because as I mentioned earlier, the goal really for us was to shift the conversation beyond just thinking about the quantity of screen time, putting limits on screen time, but thinking about how we can design for meaningful digital play experiences and thinking about how we can make the screen time a little bit of better quality. So these were some of the findings that we've reported. And in this other paper, what we did was really to think about how we can support caregivers in terms of how they can choose educational apps for digital play and learning. Now, some of you as parents, how many of you are parents here? You have heard of Common Sense Media. They have curated educational apps. So you know where to look for quality apps already. But what we thought would be useful is to empower some of these caregivers with the kind of considerations based on literature that's out there in terms of how they can select meaningful apps based on the kind of values they have that they want their children to learn. So thinking about the considerations for the curation of educational apps as a way to support digital play. So when we talk about learning as design, when we talk about the idea of wanting to support our caregivers in digital play, well, the question is, how then do we begin to advance the conversation in this direction? Well, one of the offerings that we had is in this latest book in terms of how we can design for learning experiences with digital play, making the argument really that play is not something that is frivolous, but schools can think a little bit more carefully. Educational researchers, language and literacy teachers can think a little bit more thoughtfully about how digital play can be incorporated into the formal classroom, particularly in the digital age that we are living in. Attention to learning processes also relate to the possibility of harnessing exciting technologies that have been now at our disposal to explore how we can recognize students' signs of learning. So how can we recognize students' signs of learning as they are engaging in the learning processes? Well, another trajectory of my work relates to exploring the use of analytics as well as Gen AI in the classroom. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on Gen AI later on. But first, with regard to learning analytics. Now, this was a project that was done a few years ago. Some of you may have heard of it. It's a WeRead platform. It's a learning platform, really, where students engage in collaborative reading with one another. But of course, because it's on a platform, you're able to collect data of students' engagement. You are able to have a sense of how students are actually commenting on the various parts of the reading, as well as how are they interacting with one another. And all this visualization Well, I can say that on one level, they can be problematic because there are issues related to learning analytics that we are not naive of. But at the same time, it offers hope for us to have a better understanding of the student learning process beyond just looking at the product of learning, which is really my case. How can we collectively think a little bit more about drawing attention to the students' learning process? In the current project that I'm doing with Elizabeth Koh at NIE, she's leading the project, it's a multimodal learning analytics approach towards learner dashboard. So building on the dashboard that we have developed in the earlier project, how can we use some of this video data of students' engagement through their facial expression, through their click streams, to have a sense of whether they are engaged in the learning process. Again, it's not a perfect project because there are many issues with learning analytics, collection of data, but more importantly, I think, is for us to think again about how can we then move beyond the focus on learning products to thinking about the learning process itself and how technology can offer a possibility for us to begin to recognize more signs of students' learning as language and literacy teachers. Are you guys okay? Am I okay? I have 10 more minutes. And I'm going to focus on two projects that I'm currently working on. I'm going to share with you a little bit more about these two projects. Like many of you in this room, in the last few years, my attention has turned towards generative AI because I see it as a way that will really transform, in fact, challenge the way we teach, the way we learn, and the way we assess. What is generative AI? I mean, this is like speaking to the choir, right? The term generative AI was coined by John McCarthy, 1956. And McCarthy defined AI, not generative AI, but AI as making a machine behave in ways that would be called intelligent if a human was so behaving. So Alan Turing said that computers might be able to achieve this, but really as a trick. So today, have we been tricked that we think that machines are intelligent because it's exceedingly good fundamentally in calculation? Are we giving it more credit by using the word intelligence? Now, in the work that Bill Cope and Mary Calentis have done in this area, and it's amazing work, and I recommend you to check out some of the papers that they have published. They talk about the risks of treating machines as intelligent. Mind you, they are not against the use of Gen AI. In fact, in their own ways, in their own project, they have explored the use of Gen AI. But here are some of the risks in thinking of machines as intelligence. Epistemological risks, there's no theory of knowledge. Emotionally, there's no theory of mind that the machine can speak of. Ethical, there's no values except what the programmer has programmed in them. I mean, if they are affirmative and encouraging to you, it's because they have been programmed to be doing so. And existential, there's no purpose except what you use them for. So what do we do then? We could, of course, protest against the use of Gen AI and lobby, and as a fraternity, lobby against the use of Gen AI. Or we could do this. I'm close to retirement, just let it be. It's not my battle to fight, it's the next generation, right? I just continue doing what I'm doing, right? Or I just ignore what is happening. Well, what we have tried to do in the work that we are in the projects that I have led in NIE is to explore how Gen AI can be used productively as a way for students' learning. We know that just as not all teachers are the same, not all Gen AI chatbots are the same, right? Even with the same chatbot, say ChatGPT, you can change the temperature and it can give you different responses as well. Depending on the prompts that you put in, it can offer very different responses as well. So not all Gen AI chatbots are the same. That's one thing. The second, of course, is that not all use of Gen AI chatbots are the same as well. There have been a few articles, particularly the MIT review paper, the MIT review that talks about cognitive decline or cognitive offloading by students who use Gen AI chatbots. And these are indeed issues of concern. But when you look at some of these studies, they probably illustrate the worst possible way the chatbots can be used, right? Give me the answer to the question. Give me the essay of this topic. Key in the instructions that the course tutor have put into the assignment, and use the product that the Gen AI chatbots offer. So these are possibly the worst ways in which Gen AI chatbots can be used. What we were trying to do in our project is to think about how, when the master students come to our courses in NIE, they are really interested in developing their critical reasoning. They are really interested in developing their academic writing. They don't just want to pass the examination and just get by. They want to learn. And how can we then use Gen AI chatbots as a way to support their learning? So what we did was to develop two companions, a reading companion and a writing companion. The reading companion was meant to support students' reading of academic writing by getting them to, of course, understand, first of all, the basic ideas behind the articles. So some of these functionalities will allow them to do that. But more than that, to guide them to move beyond just understanding the arguments in the article to critically questioning some of these ideas in the article. So when I worked with the colleagues from NTU School of Computing, the remit given to them was that, could you imagine that me sitting next to the student, guiding them as they read the article? How can it help them in that regard? Similarly, for the writing companion, how can we support students to craft better essays, not just to cut and paste the essays generated by Gen AI chatbots, but really to think about ways to provide feedback on the student's writing. Again, like having me sitting next to the tutor, to the student as the student writes the essay. So that is the goal that we have in developing these learning companions, and we have tried that in the graduate class, class at NIE. And well, the feedback have been broadly positive from the first pilot. Many things to improve, which we are working on at this point in time. So that is the work that has been done in the Singapore context. But more importantly, we also realize that we are not alone in seeing the value of the use of Gen AI chatbots for teaching and learning. Not long ago, a student came to me and said that, could I do a systematic review on the use of Gen AI in the language and literacy classroom? Well, I was a bit uncomfortable then because I said that, you know, for systematic review, usually we need hundreds of articles, and Gen AI chatbot has been just around for 2-3 years. I don't think it's meaningful to do a lit review. Well, she proved me wrong. She was able to find a good number of publications, and we were able to surface specific findings related to the use of Gen AI chatbots in the classroom. And of course, we published this systematic review, and I thought, well, that is not too bad. Gen AI chatbot does really help to support language learning in specific ways in the classroom. And then one day, I had an issue with my mobile phone, and I said, I need to change my plan. I called the telco, and they directed me to Gen AI chatbot. As I engaged with the chatbot typing, my heartbeat got faster. I started sweating, and I was feeling really, really upset. And I thought, even though we know that the chatbot can get me to the response, what is the process that I engage in when I work with the chatbot? So that was why I thought, okay, let's do a project called Does the Teacher Matter? And this focuses on the student's physiological response in online interaction with AI chatbot and a human teacher. So this is the project I want to share with you. We collected, it's a small proof of concept project. We had data from 30 participants. 15 of them interacted with a chatbot as they brainstorm ideas for academic writing. And 15 of them interacted with a real lecturer online typing as they brainstorm ideas for an academic essay. So which group do you think enjoyed the process more? Which group had better engagement? Chatbot group? Teacher group? Okay. Which group do you think did better? Chatbot group? Teacher group, eventually for the essay outline? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so we did the between group analysis. So we assessed these positive moods and negative moods, right? Positive moods in terms of feeling curious, motivated, excited. So we had variables on them. We also got them to report their moods before and after the session. So positive moods, most of them intensified for both groups, but those in the human condition had a greater increase, right? So you are right in the sense that those who interacted with the teacher felt more positive moods. Most negative moods intensified for the chatbot condition, mainly because we had an FGD later, we found that some of them became a bit frustrated with the chatbot that we developed, because our chatbot was engaging a lot in Socratic questioning, and they wanted answers, and they were quite frustrated that the chatbot kept asking them questions. They said, no, just give me the answers, right? Yeah, so that was why there was some negative moods that intensified. But statistically, and what was interesting was that there was many moods that showed no statistically significant differences between the two groups. So at the end of the session, both groups felt focused, more curious, a bit more confident, more determined. Some felt more confused, challenged, overwhelmed, and all that. But what we found really was that the chatbot could still support a wide range of engagement-related moods, despite limitations in replicating the emotional nuance of human interaction. So in general, the average findings intensified for positive moods and increased for both conditions. The human group felt more positive moods, and we know that ultimately the physiological activation was similar in both the conditions as well. So what were some of the takeaways that we had? Well, we realized that while the human-led brainstorming session fostered greater emotional gains after all, the chatbot group still supported core engagement outcomes because there were some positive moods that improved. And it points to the potential of Gen AI as a supplementary tool to help the teacher in supporting students in their brainstorming process. Of course, we know the potential of the chatbot in terms of personalized support as well as 24/7 availability. Interestingly, after 15 sessions, my teacher collaborator came to me and said that, your study is flawed. You shouldn't have been measuring the student's heart rate. You should have been measuring mine. Because after more and more sessions, I was getting more and more increasingly frustrated and tired and whatnot. So, well, I guess if the chatbot is able to improve the mood score for the students as well, perhaps it's not a bad idea to think about how the chatbot can be used for some of these low-stakes tasks. We also look at the essay grading. So very quickly, I just want to share with you the essay outline that we got the students to create, and we got our teacher collaborator to mark. So they were scored across 5 components, and you can see that it was comparable. But what was significant was that in terms of the fine grades, A+, and C, you'll find that the chatbot group, the one in blue, had a greater number. So students who interacted with the chatbot scored a bit more A+ and a bit more C. And we thought that it was interesting finding as well because, again, the fact is that the chatbot group students performed better in terms of getting A+. And we asked the teacher, what caused you to give this particular student A+, or this particular script an A+? And the teacher said it was because it was able to offer me ideas that I never thought about. And so that was fresh and original. And much of it came from the interaction with the chatbot as well. And we look at the group that were in C range, and this was exclusively the chatbot group. And one of the considerations we had was that perhaps this group of students were inherently weaker and therefore would require the teacher's support. So working with the chatbot could not benefit them as much as well. So what we did subsequently was also then to look at the interaction between the teacher and the chatbot, and we wanted to find out, okay, were there any differences in the way students were interacting with the teacher and the chat log? First of all, in terms of the chat log, for chatbots interaction, well, obviously with the chatbots, there were a lot more words that was being produced because the chatbot just generate words, whereas with the teacher, there were fewer words. This is the sense of the word count, and you'll find that actually the students offered the same, almost the same amount of word regardless with a chatbot or teacher, but of course with the chatbot had a lot more words that was given. We also look at the different responses in terms of the way they have communicated to the students. So we look at the teacher and the chatbot and how they were engaging in different forms of communication. We found that chatbot tends to explain, encourage, and guide the students more, but teachers are better at confirming and expanding and advising. Of course, this was specific to the unique chatbot that we have designed, as well as to the teacher that we work with. This is to give you a sense of the proportion of the chatbot and teacher's response corresponding to one another. And then, of course, thinking about the students' response. How were they responding to the chatbot and to the teacher? What was interesting for us was that if you see the line in red, the row in red, and the column in red, and that is the one that they engage with the teachers, you find that there's a lot more agreement they signal with the teacher than with the chatbot. They were also commanding the chatbot a lot, whereas compared to the teacher, they were making requests. So some of these interactions were fairly interesting to us to understand how a chatbot and a teacher might invite different kinds of communicative practices with the student. And then we realized that there was a few students that did really well, and we wanted to look at how were they actually engaging with the chatbot. Were they just agreeing with what the chatbot was saying? Were they just making requests to the chatbot? But one particular student's chat log really stood out. So this, as you can see at the bottom, was really how the student was communicating with the chatbot. You see, a lot of thought has gone into it in terms of how the communication takes place beyond just agreeing, beyond just asking for information. In fact, what the student did was challenging some of the responses that the chatbot was offering, rejecting some of these responses as well. And as a result, it was not surprising that the student did really well for his essay. So if you're interested in this, of course, we published the findings of this particular study in an interview that we had, as well as in a commentary that we offered to University World News, thinking about the response of AI in the classroom. So that was a project that we did in terms of trying to contribute to the notion of learning as design. We asked the question, does the teacher matter? And in retrospect, I thought the project was also flawed at another level because it was asking the wrong question. Does the teacher matter? Well, obviously the teacher matters, right? All of you matter. You are irreplaceable. But the question that I should have really been asking, and this is the question that I'm inviting all of us to be asking throughout this conference, is a more basic question of how should we be designing for literacy learning in the digital age. So I hope that through this presentation, I've given you some insights on how we can start thinking about our role as designers of learning, how we can start thinking about the paradigm of learning as design, and perhaps explore the affordances and recognize the constraints of Gen AI as we approach language and literacy instruction today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lim, for your fascinating presentation. It's now time for questions from the floor. We are recording this session, so please come forward and speak into one of the microphones. Please identify yourself, tell us which institution and country you're from. Can I have the first question? We have about 3 minutes. I think we have a question from Dr. Oliver Ballance from Victoria University of Wellington.
Thanks, Victor.
Thanks.
Fascinating to see the huge range of work you've been doing in the area. I'm wondering, do you feel you see like a sort of a Matthew effect across the various studies you've been looking at where it seems like the rich get richer? Like, for example, you showed there that some of the students are doing really well with the AI and some of them really struggle to do well with it. So do you sort of feel there's this sort of rich get richer or Matthew effect across the various studies you've looked at?
Thank you very much. I think that is a really important question, and it speaks to, of course, what the guest of honor was focusing on today about inclusivity, really. I mean, one of the key reasons why I have been advancing the paradigm of learning as design and drawing attention to the value of digital play is the fact that as long as we ignore the value of the use of digital technologies and digital play, we will ignore and we will neglect the kind of social effect that it has on youths around us. So the kind of digital divide that is happening amongst youths. In a separate study that I did with my colleague Lo Ching Yi during the pandemic, we look at how two youths in Singapore were navigating the school closure and how they were using different digital tools and devices for learning, but also for play. And obviously, you will not be surprised to find that there were huge gaps in terms of the differences between the two experiences. So the youth from the higher SES had a lot more access to subscription and better quality devices and tools. And of course, the youth that were from the lower SES were struggling. And one of the arguments that we make in this paper really is what I have been saying to you today, that policymakers, researchers, as well as teachers need to pay attention to the effect that digital tools and digital play can offer for literacy learning. Because if you feel that, well, that is really not my territory, I'm just interested in what goes on in the classroom, then the digital divide will kick in. And of course, the kind of differences in terms of not just access, but in terms of the literacies that are to be developed in the kids would of course be quite concerning. But if teachers, educators, policymakers recognize that, hey, digital tools do make a difference. Digital play does make a difference. Let's bring them to the classroom. And we know that education, the schools, the classroom plays a huge role in terms of leveling the playing field. I think that can really make a difference. Sorry.
Invited speaker session 3 and 4 are about to begin. Please make your way to the auditorium or conference room 503 and 504. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time, but you can approach Professor Lim separately or come to his dialogue sessions tomorrow. So please join me in giving him a round of applause. Thank you very much, and enjoy the conference.